Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're previewing Anthony Edwards' season. What can we expect from the third-year star? We'll go ahead and call him a star already. What's the ceiling this season? What kind of role will he play in terms of the rotations that Chris Finch rolls out? And where can he make his biggest strides in 2022-23? It's all coming up on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody, and a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube, of course, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and also at B Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. We are nearing the end of our player preview series right now. Obviously, training camp is underway. There's plenty of folks covering what's going on a daily basis at training camp. I want to continue talking about, I'm doing full shows now on each of the Wolves starters, essentially, or projected starters. I guess we don't technically know for sure. But today, that's Anthony Edwards. Tomorrow, I think we'll do Rudy Gobert, and then Monday, Karl-Anthony Towns. And I want to spend some time similar to what we've done with all the other players in the rotation, but dive a little bit deeper on these guys because, I mean, frankly, they'll be on the floor more, right? So there's more to talk about. We have more of a body of work. They were on the floor more over the last several years, so we know what to expect. But also, where could each of these guys improve this season? And where do they fit? Yes, we know they're starters, but what does the bench stagger rotation look like? I want to kind of project that a little based on what lineups looked like last year, where the success was for head coach Chris Finch and his rotations, and which areas each of these guys can improve in the quickest, or improvement that could be made this season, really. So let's talk about Anthony Edwards here today. With unquestionably, he was far, far better as a second-year player than he was as a rookie. You look at the per-game stats, it's even obvious there, right? The minutes per game went up slightly, which obviously helps those counting stats. But across the board, the per-game numbers trended in the right direction. There's nothing that didn't. The field goal percentage, the three-point percentage, the free throw percentage, rebounds, assists, steals, the points per game, the whole thing improved. But it obviously goes much deeper than that. And strictly talking about offense, it was shot selection. Shot selection was the biggest thing. He took more threes as a second-year player. His three-point rate went up to 48%. So almost half of his shot attempts were three-pointers last season, which is fine because he made them at a decent enough clip, roughly almost exactly league average, actually, 35.7%. League average is right in that same range right now. Actually, I have it. Last year was actually only 35.4. The year before was 36.7. So above league average last season, but right in line with league average over the last couple of years. So a good three-point shooting year for Ant, and he took more of them. He shot more. He took more attempts within 3 feet of the basket as well. According to Basketball Reference, he took, actually, I take that back. It was about the same. I had in my head that was a greater number. The bigger thing is he took less mid-range shots, right? So between 16 feet and 3-point range, he only took 5% of his shots from that range. As a rookie, he took 7.2%, which may not seem like a big difference, but it adds up, right? So he took more threes. He took less shots from 16 feet and out, but within the arc. And he was more successful at the rim. So even though the shots at the rim went down slightly, his percentage went up by almost 2 points at the rim. So that's significant as well. The free throw rate stayed the same. And we'll talk a little bit later about the dip we saw midseason because of the ankle issue that he had. Well, actually, first the ankle issue just prior to the All-Star break, but then also a little bit of a knee issue too. And pretty clearly that impacted the way he played for several weeks. And I would be willing to bet that the free throw rate itself, and actually, I don't need to bet that. We can just look at it. The free throw rate itself went down when he was injured. And who knows how much more that was that impacted him over the course of the season. Obviously, everyone's playing hurt on some level. But for somebody who relies so much on athleticism and playing through contact when they get into the paint, even as big as Ant is, it takes a toll. So I would imagine that has, because again, the shots at the rim weren't down drastically. It was a percentage point and a half less, and the free throw rate stayed the same. So, but the biggest thing was shot selection, and then also he just was a better 3-point shooter, and that can account for the scoring uptick and the overall efficiency uptick. Is he took more threes and he made more threes. He went from 32.9% from deep as a rookie to 35.7 last season, which is a pretty significant jump. I'm going to grab his catch and shoot versus off the dribble numbers here. Last season, as a rookie, he attempted 7 3-pointers per game and made, as I said, just under 33%. But last year he attempted, he went from 7 threes per game, and we talked about the rate a second ago, but in terms of per game numbers, it's about 8.5 threes per game, and the percentage went up almost 3 full points. His off the dribble threes were just 32.5% last year, and so if he can either improve them or take a little bit less of them. Now, part of the reason he's so dangerous in the open floor is because teams know that he can shoot off the dribble, and he has pretty much unlimited range, but he can also get right past you and dunk on you and make you into a viral moment for all the wrong reasons. So teams have to consider both of those things. I think he will improve the off the dribble threes. That's one of the things that, like, I guarantee you he spent this offseason working on. And there's workout videos that are out there on the internet. You can find that show as such. So if the off the dribble threes improve, the catch and shoot threes were already 41% this season for Anthony Edwards. So again, 36% overall on threes, but he was essentially 32% on pull-up threes, and he was 41% on catch and shoot. If those numbers continue to trend in the right direction, or he simply takes even more catch and shoot threes, perhaps, he's going to initiate a lot of offense. And I guess maybe that's another reason why the pull-up threes need to improve even more is as he goes through his career, he's going to start initiating more and more and more and more. I think that's very likely, especially say D'Lo moves on after the season. Anthony Edwards is the Wolves will probably find a lower usage defensive minded point guard, maybe a bigger version of Jordan McLaughlin or a bigger version of Tyus Jones, that type of a player who can play off the ball and also initiate some offense if needed. D'Lo isn't really that guy. D'Lo needs the ball in his hands to succeed. So now I'm talking about beyond this season, but there's it's entirely possible that Ant continues to see more time with the ball in his hands offensively, incrementally over the next several years. And so the pull-up threes, the off-the-bounce threes have to continue to also trend in the right direction. I think the other thing, in addition, we already talked about the shot. The other thing he improved offensively was pretty much all the rate-based statistics, but most obviously the assist rate. His assist rate went from 14.6% as a rookie to 17.4% as a sophomore, which is a significant jump. And that goes back to, as I just mentioned, initiating more offense. He got the opportunity to actually essentially run point guard a little bit last year. And he did good with it. The turnover rate went up a little, but it didn't go up as much as his assist rate did. The turnover rate only went up by 1.5 points. The assist rate went up almost 3 full points. Defensively, we also know he improved there. Well, actually, let me stick with the offensive side for just a minute. I think there was a point last year, kind of mid-season, where it seemed, and this is just based on observing, it seemed to kind of click for Ant in terms of passing and timing and spacing and hitting guys at the right time, knowing when he could, get a step on somebody, get into the paint and kick the ball back out, throw the ball over his head to the perimeter to an open shooter, sling it into the corner. We didn't see him do that hardly at all as a rookie. It was forced passes off the pick and roll. It was, turnovers and those types of plays and those types of sets. And that still happened, and it will, but I think we saw more of that kind of next level, like, okay, my first read's not open. Let me kick it. Let me skip past it, or let me, sling this ball to the corner and find the open guy who maybe wasn't my first option on this play. But that's the guy that's open. And I now know that the way the defense is covering, right? So like when the Wolves run a pick and roll and the defense sucks in to try and stop Ant, and, maybe the low man stepping up, for Ant to be able to identify, okay, I can't dump it to Rudy or Towns or whoever because the low man's stepping up to stop the drive and try and play too, but I can sling it to the opposite corner to, Jaden McDaniels, who, is shooting corner threes at roughly league average. Like this is the right read. Or I can maybe in the short corner, there's somebody that's open. But to understand that it's not always the play right in front of you. It's okay, I have additional teammates. And if the defender's here, then I know that's opening something on the weak side of the defense or whatever that might be. That started to click last season for Ant. And that's that next level. Like, no one's asking him to be Chris Paul, but if he understands just how effective he could be, and then in some of those cases, he just dunks over someone and it doesn't matter. He draws a foul. But to be able to like make the defense to at least make pause for a split second and have to make a decision, because he had tunnel vision as a rookie and for parts of last year where it was like, okay, we'll load up on Ant and this guy's going to try and go 1-on-5. But if he can remember, like, hey, I've got teammates in the corner, this is where guys will be based on our offense and based on the coverage that the defense is playing, he's going to be that much more effective and the Wolves will be that much better as a team. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about defense and then we'll talk about lineups here as we continue the Anthony Edwards season preview. First, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find. BetOnline is the place to go. The Vikings, of course, are in London this weekend if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan. So an early Sunday morning game if you're stateside. Uh, Minnesota Golden Gophers college football. You could go college football or NFL on BetOnline. They play Saturday morning at 11. I believe Illinois. They're off to a great start this season. Football is a ton of fun to bet. And so if you're into football at all, that's the place you got to be for it. And then also win totals for NBA, futures for NBA. It's all over there currently at BetOnline as well. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all sport wagering information, including live betting, which is a lot of fun. I love live betting, especially during football. Again, it's just a different way. If there's a game that you don't have a rooting interest in and you just are watching it to watch it, it makes it that much more fun. They also have up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB and the stretch run of the regular season, plus MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, quickly about Anthony Edwards' defense. He was just a lot better last year. I don't know how else to put it really. Other than just on ball, he was far more locked in. The physical tools were obviously already there, so there wasn't a massive improvement there, other than the fact that he reportedly grew a little bit last season and was even bigger than he was as a rookie. So that helps. Um, but under having a year in the league and understanding what other teams were going to try and do with the ball in their hands and just the quickness of opposing ball handlers, and it's almost because he became more comfortable offensively that he felt like he could lock in more on defense. And I mean, I'll be honest, if you go back and listen to pre-draft podcasts before the Wolves drafted Anthony Edwards, I was more on the LaMelo Ball train. And one of the main reasons was I was worried about Anthony Edwards' defense. I was afraid that based on the tape with him at University of Georgia, he was going to have bad shot selection and not be a great shooter, and he wasn't going to lock in defensively. Well, the shot selection thing has certainly improved. The shooting numbers are way better than they were at college, and the defense is astronomically better than it was in college. And I think they're all related to the same thing. There was some level of boredom when he was at Georgia. And obviously, when you're profiling somebody and you're going back to a prospect profile, you worry about somebody that maybe isn't locked in all the time. But you could also kind of understand it. It was a bad team. He didn't have any other NBA talent or anything close to it on that team. And he knew he was going to the NBA. And in hindsight, sure, it would have been great if he tried harder. But all of those things are related. All of the issues he had at Georgia were related to just locking in. And now that he's in the NBA, he understood last year, hey, I could be a two-way player. I can guard these guys and just, work my tail off defensively and be a really, I wouldn't say he's yet a lockdown defender, but he's an above average on ball defender. I've said that on the show before. This isn't a hot take. I mean, it's I actually heard it not that long ago. I think it was the Zach Lowe podcast. He and John Krasinski from The Athletic were talking, and it came up that Ant was a good on ball defender. And I've said this on the show too. The off ball defense needs work, and I think that goes back to an attentiveness thing, right? Part of it is Ant wanting to lurk and play free safety. He loves football. We know that. He wants to pick the pass off and take it the other way for a dunk, and he's good at that. He gets one or two a game, it seems like. But sometimes that leads to too much ball watching because he's looking for his next opportunity, and his guys just kind of, finding the soft spot in the defense with Ant's head turn. He's back cutting or he's finding a soft spot on the perimeter for an open catch and shoot three. That's a real problem for Ant. If he can shore that up, he's a plus defender, got a shot in an all defense team, 100%. And I don't feel crazy saying that. If you had told me that um, back when he was being drafted or early in his rookie season, I would have been like, yeah, I don't know that this guy's ever going to lock in. We've seen it. And the physical tools are there. The intelligence is there. The understanding of the game, the timing, the spacing, etc. For him to be an all defense type player. I don't think that happens this year, but he's not far away. And he's also only 21 years old. So I think the Wolves are going to give him the toughest perimeter assignment on most nights. Jaden McDaniels will get the biggest, toughest wing or forward, somebody with a little bit more length. I think Ant is the guy guarding the primary dangerous ball handler in the backcourt. If it's a team that has a guard who initiates mostly that, D'Lo can guard great, Ant will guard the two. But if there's a point guard that's either a little bit bigger or a little bit more physical or dangerous off the dribble, I think Ant could be the guy getting that individual assignment because he was so good on the ball last season. And the metrics bear that out. ESPN Real Plus Minus shows that he improved there. Whichever defensive metric, which is always a little tricky, whichever one you prefer, it essentially says the same thing. So you're looking at a guy who's 21. He's already a plus defender. He's already a plus offensive player in terms of his skill set. Now it's just improving the efficiency on offense, continuing to improve the assist rate, making sure that shot selection stays strong, finishing at the rim, which is another thing he's got to improve at. It's not bad, right? I mean, he's shooting he was just under 66% at the rim, which that's not bad, but with his size and athleticism, that number should be more like 70%, if not even a little bit higher. I mean, you go look at some of the other guys. I'll pull up John Morant's real quick and look at what he was at the rim, but I'm betting it's higher. With its size, he's obviously bigger than a guy like John Morant. With his touch, which is very good, we've seen him miss. He struggles sometimes with the left hand at the rim, sometimes putting too much spin on the ball, things like that. There's improvement that needs to happen there as well. Ja's just over 70% at the rim. But I will also point out, and this is something I talked about this. I don't remember why. It might have been in one of the rankings a couple weeks ago that I was going through where it had Ja significantly ahead of Anthony Edwards. The year 2 to year 3 jump that John Morant took, if Ant takes that jump, I mean, he's an all-star, probably borderline all-NBA. Like, Ja was fantastic last season. Prior to last year, he was not better than Anthony Edwards has been. I would argue he was roughly the same in terms of his actual on-court impact. But last season, Ja took a jump 2 years ago. Ja's second year, John Morant shot 63% at the rim. Last season, he was 70.6% at the rim on roughly the same frequency of attempts. The number was down because of the injury, but the frequency of attempts was the same. 70.6% at the rim. Ant was better than Ja in his second year, over 63%. But Ant's got to get to that 70. Ant can get to 70% at the rim. The assist rate could tick up closer to 19, 20%. The three-pointers continue to stay strong, right at league average or hopefully a little bit above. You're talking about an all-world player. You just are. I mean, at that point, he's a top 15, maybe even top 10 guy if the defense stays strong. So it's the finishing at the rim. It's the improved efficiency on the perimeter. It's the continued improvement defensively. Again, if he does what he did last year defensively, that's still a good defensive player. I just think there's so much room for growth for a 21-year-old that's ultra athletic and a giant body for his position. I mean, the sky really is the limit for Anthony Edwards. And I know that's not breaking news or anything, but if he improves in those very specific areas, then look out. This could be a phenomenal season. Again, if he takes that jaw-like jump from year 2 to year 3, then we're talking all NBA. I really think we could get there way quicker than a lot of folks realize. Okay, I want to talk about the role and potential lineup combinations that could make the most sense for Anthony Edwards. So we'll do that here next to close the show. All right, let's close the show by talking about Anthony Edwards, essentially the rotation this year, where I think he could fit in. Obviously, he's going to start. I mean, there's no question about that. But what does the bench stagger look like? Who are his best combinations from the bench, from the reserve unit, I guess? In terms of minutes per game, I think Ant's going to be right there at the top this season for the Wolves. He's obviously younger than all the other stars and starters on the team. He averaged, his minutes were up slightly last year. He went from 32 minutes a game as a rookie to 34 last season. I think he's probably again in the 34, 35 range. You don't want to put too many miles on his body, especially we talked earlier briefly about the knee and the ankle issues. It hasn't come up this offseason. It sounds like he's healthy, but very clearly last season, like those numbers would have been a lot higher. You go back and look at Well, even here, just the 5 games before he missed 4. Remember, he sat out 4 games at the very beginning of March. The Wolves won all 4. It was against the Golden State win was impressive, but it was a depleted Golden State team. And then they beat Oklahoma City, Portland, Oklahoma City, and Ant missed all those games except for the last OKC game. But in those 5 games before, he didn't score more than 17 in any of them. He only shot above 50% in one of them. He was 0 for 8 shooting in one game. He had that 3-game stretch against Charlotte, Toronto, and Memphis where he shot what was that? 4 of 29 over the course of 3 games, including 1 of 17 from beyond the arc. And that was all due to I think at the time that was actually the knee, if I'm not mistaken. And then the ankle cropped up right before the All-Star break. Or actually, I guess the knee was earlier in the season. That was the ankle, if I remember correctly now, correcting myself. But if you throw out those games, and again, I know everybody plays hurt, but this was such a clear departure from what Ant normally does. 5 games in a row without scoring over 17 points when he only had like 30 of those games, not even 30, like 25 of those games all season. And so many of them were packed together. You can easily point to the injury as being the primary reason for that. So all that to say, I think the Wolves need to be, he's 21, but still the mileage that he puts on his legs, especially, and with the way he plays, which is one of the reasons I'm worried about John Morant, is because of his size and the punishment he takes. Ant is obviously a little bit bigger and plays and shoots more threes than Ja does. Ja's always going to shoot more at the rim than Anthony Edwards does. But I worry about the pounding. So I think the minutes are probably 34, 35 minutes a game. And of course, he's going to start with D'Lo and Jaden McDaniels, most likely, Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. But what does the bench rotation look like? I think, and this goes actually, pulling for a little bit from what I said on Wednesday's show about D'Lo playing with the Rudy Gobert unit. I think that the Ant fit with Karl-Anthony Towns is continues to be really good. Obviously saw that last year. But also his fit with Jalen Noel, his fit with Jordan McLaughlin, also depending on how much run J-Mac gets. Last season, believe it or not, Anthony Edwards' best 2-man combination was Jordan McLaughlin, which surprised me a little bit. I just would not have expected it. But in 327 minutes, which is admittedly a somewhat of a small sample size, but not minuscule. I mean, like over the course they played at 327 minutes together. That's I mean, like, it's similar to the minutes that Towns played with Noel last season, for instance. So I think it's a big enough sample size to draw the conclusion that, hey, this worked. And it was essentially a net rating. It was an 11.9 net rating over those 327 minutes, which was one of the best pairings on the entire team. In fact, if you take all pairings of 300 minutes or more, it's actually third next to Towns and Noel, Malik Beasley and Noel, and McLaughlin and Edwards. We talked about the Towns Noel one a couple weeks ago at length, but it was the third best 2-man pairing on the entire team. I don't know exactly why that is, other than, I mean, Ant initiated more, I think, when he was on the floor with J-Mac, and McLaughlin was pretty good in terms of catch and shoot 3-point shooting. And also he could help take some pressure off defensively. And Ant could also hide some of McLaughlin's deficiencies due to his size. But all that to say, you have a bench unit with J-Mac at the 1 and Anthony Edwards at the 2. And then Karl-Anthony Towns probably at the 5, and you could have Taurean Prince or Kyle Anderson at the 4. I think Kyle Anderson is going to be the preferred option at the 4 next to Towns. So you fill in the blank with the 3. Maybe it's Jaden McDaniels, maybe it's Taurean Prince, but you go J-Mac at the 1, Edwards at the 2, Anderson at the 4, Towns at the 5. That's a really good defensive lineup. McLaughlin is small, but he's a solid defender for his size. Kyle Anderson's an above-average defender. Ant is an above-average defender. And if they're going to play blitz coverage, pick and roll coverage there and switch away from the drop coverage, they'll no doubt play with Rudy in the game. And Towns and Kyle Anderson can be aggressive on the perimeter. Ant can help on the perimeter as well. McLaughlin's very good in that blitzing pick and roll coverage. That could work really well. And then offensively, I think it would be strong. You could also go Jalen Noel essentially at point guard and go all offense and have Noel and Edwards in the backcourt. We saw that their pairing together was very good as well. As I mentioned a moment ago, it was a little above. It was a positive net rating. It wasn't fantastic, but I think that could work. And I think a lot of those minutes were with a point guard on the floor. But if you actually play Noel at point guard and Ant at the 2, that's a big lineup. It's one where Ant would have to guard the ball handler because Noel's a minus defender. But Kyle Anderson can also guard on the perimeter. So I just think there's a lot of, and maybe you put J-Mac at the 3, McDaniels at the 3. So you've got Noel, Edwards, McDaniels, Anderson, Towns. That's a ton of length. And Noel's the only minus defender among that group. So that could be a pretty formidable reserve unit as well. The great thing about Ant is that he's becoming a legit 2-way player. I mean, he's not Jimmy Butler yet, but he's becoming a two-way player. And there aren't that many of those guys at that position. Obviously, Giannis plays a very different type of game. LeBron in his prime played a different type of game and still does and is still a strong two-way player. Those guys are different than Anthony Edwards. There aren't that many, 6'5" guys that are essentially shooting guards that are truly two-way players. I mean, Jimmy Butler is kind of the prototype of the last decade. And that type of a game is within reach for Anthony Edwards. So you could fit him in with any of these lineups and feel really good about it. But I really like the pairing with Karl-Anthony Towns. I think the one last point on this. I think the Ant Towns pick and pop game is so much more dangerous than, well, I shouldn't say it this way because I think it's good either way. But I think to the optimal pick and roll, pick and pop partner for Ant is Karl-Anthony Towns. I think the optimal partner for D'Angelo Russell is Rudy Gobert. It can obviously, you can mix and match there because Rudy's fantastic. They're all great. But the threat of Ant driving and Towns popping is going to really mess with defenses, right? Because you can't give Ant space because he can shoot off the dribble, close to league average off the dribble. We talked about this, and that number is going to improve. If you give him any kind of a lane, he's going to dunk on you. He's going to get to the basket. And if Towns is popping, the defense is going to have to pay attention to that because you're talking about one of the best shooters in the entire league, a 41+% three-point shooter. You have to pick your poison. With Ant driving, Towns popping, there's also the threat of, Towns can roll as well. And with D'Lo and Rudy, we know Rudy's the best roller in the league, the best diver in the league. The rim gravity that Rudy possesses is massive. And D'Angelo Russell's a fantastic pick and roll passer and can also shoot from all three levels and has no qualms with pulling up from mid-range and knocking down a mid-range jumper. So those guys are all going to start together. So those possibilities can exist from the opening tap. But you could stagger these players, so you could always have one of those combinations on the floor virtually, probably 40 of the 48 minutes. I don't think that's crazy at all, if not more. So the fact that you could always have an elite pick and roll duo on the floor, and usually the Wolves are going to have at least 3 knockdown type shooters, average or above 3-point shooters on the floor. They're usually going to have at least 4 good defenders. This is a versatile rotation. I've been saying it all off season. But Anthony Edwards is a versatile superstar, a versatile star at the moment who can be a superstar as soon as this season. If he just does a few things that we talked about earlier, improve the off-ball defense is probably first and foremost, continue to improve three-point shooting and improve his shooting at the rim, continue to improve the assist rate. If all that stuff just incrementally improves this year and the team as a whole improves, you're going to be talking about all-star Anthony Edwards here in just a few months, and he's got a shot at All-NBA. We are not far off. All NBA Anthony Edwards. And I truly believe that. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. We will complete our player preview series on Monday. So we got one more show on Friday. We got Monday's show, and then we'll roll right into, preseason games on Tuesday. I mean, the timing worked out perfect. I wish I could say I timed it all out exactly several weeks ago, but preseason starts next Tuesday against the Miami Heat. Training camp ongoing. So plenty to talk about. We're only a couple weeks away from now. Well, we're less than a week away from real basketball in air quotes in terms of preseason, only a couple weeks beyond that away from actual regular season basketball. So appreciate you listening to the podcast, and hopefully you do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. A reminder, you can find us on YouTube. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment. If you listen on any other platform, please help us out with the review. It definitely is appreciated. And obviously we couldn't do this without all of you, the listeners. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that you can make your second listen to the fantastic Locked On Fantasy Basketball Show with Josh Lloyd. He hosts the #1 daily fantasy basketball show on the planet. Number one fantasy show, Josh Lloyd, Locked On Fantasy. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.